The first session this afternoon features 3 grain industry safety professionals to discuss how safety, technology, and maintenance are critical aspects of the grain industry, and how advancements in these areas play a significant role in enhancing efficiency, reducing risks, and ensuring reliable operations. Our panelists include Jason Eardley. He's the Process Safety Technology Lead for ADM Agricultural Services and Milling Division in Decatur, Illinois. He's been with ADM for 26 years in various positions, including environmental compliance, health and safety, food safety, and sanitation. He's a graduate of Illinois State University with a degree in occupational safety and is a certified safety professional. He's chairman of NGFA's Safety, Health, and Environmental Committee. Our second guest is Noland Morris. He's the Director of Environmental Health and Safety for the Grain Division of Scoular Company here in Omaha, Nebraska. Noland has been in the ag industry for 40 plus years, the last 7 of which have been with Scoular. Before that, he was with Viterra. He's been involved in the environment, health, and safety roles for the last 18 years and serves on NGFA's Safety, Health, and Environment Committee. Matt Surdick is the Senior Director of Environment, Health, and Safety with the Ag Retail Distribution and Transportation Division at CHS. Matt holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration and a Master of Science degree in Risk Control from the University of Wisconsin-Stout and is a certified safety professional. He has spent 17 years in the ag industries with roles in environment, health, and safety, food safety, and quality, and also serves on NGFA's Safety, Health, and Environment Committee. Please welcome our panelists.
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Surdick, as I introduced, long introduction there. Today, what I'm going to talk about is transportation technology. And if I can get my clicker to turn on. Oh, there we go. This is an important aspect that we've been focusing on within CHS. For just a little bit of background story here, we run about 85 million miles on an annual basis within CHS. We have about 3,600 commercial motor vehicles traveling pretty much to all the upper United States, down south. And so what we really tried to focus on are 3 main categories as it goes to transportation technology. The first one I'm going to go over here is telematics. We've also started to focus on camera technology in the cab. And then the last one is going to be improved visibility with our units that are going to be going down the road. And while I know this is focused a lot on the grain industry, you're going to see some crossover into our agronomy operations, but also our energy operations, bobtails propane within CHS. So the first one that I want to talk about is that telematics, and this is something that, and I do want to put a little bit of caveat, this is something that we are rolling into our fleet. It's not fully baked into all 3,600 commercial motor vehicles, but it's something that we've been starting to implement primarily on our energy side and working in through now into our ag sector as well. But the telematics piece is an important one to understand where our units are traveling to, understanding, we've got some of the safety features on here with crash detection and notification, not just relying on that phone call of, hey, I just smoked a deer, or hey, I got into a vehicle accident. It's getting that information directly back to us as our dispatchers or our safety contacts. Other ones are hours of service, compliance, but also some of our driver behaviors. And this is an important piece that goes into our camera technology, but leveraging it in the telematics space where we can see where they're accelerating, where they're braking at, the cornering, the speed direction. There's situations that happen, we can instantly pull up the data from that unit and show, what kind of speed were they talking before they got into an incident. Or we can be able to monitor and say, is this individual has a lead foot and has started to travel too fast that we need to go have a sit down with that driver to make sure they understand the expectations while driving for CHS. Seatbelt usage, that's another big one that we continually focus on, but that telematics can really elevate up the game in making sure that our drivers are operating safely behind the wheel. The other one is, and this is kind of a big one that's coming into our space, is that camera technology. And this isn't just forward-facing technology. This is also looking back at the driver and even down the sides of the unit itself. But taking it a step further with the improvement of AI, this technology allows to identify, seatbelt usage. It identifies if individuals are pulling up that cell phone and going to be trying to text and drive. You can even set it up to say, hey, if they're going to grab a drink or going to grab something to eat. What we like about this is it's not just recording an event. What it does is it gives that reminder, that notification to the driver right then and there, to be able to actively change the behavior of our drivers while they're behind the wheel. And not create maybe an administrative burden of just sending back like, hey, you need to follow up with this driver for a seatbelt issue. It gives that instant feedback to those drivers, letting them know to change, adjust, and if it doesn't adjust, then ultimately recording. But this has really helped, and we'll go into some of the challenges. We'll talk about challenges with it, but when we look at adoption of it, really our drivers appreciate it and actually really like it for more of the protection piece. As I mentioned, 85 million miles, that puts us into some difficult areas, whether we're talking the areas of Chicago and driving and congestion, or out in rural areas of South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, down to Texas, you name it. If these events happen, it's a he said, she said, that type of situation. That camera technology now allows us to go back and see exactly step by step how an event actually happened, and it ultimately has protected our drivers in those situations where another group or another driver comes back at the organization. So again, we talked about the different types of camera solutions. I'm a big one on the PowerPoint. That's why I think it's nice to be able to see how they're set up. But we've used a lot of this in those incident investigations, event learnings, to say, what can we have done better? What are the things that we need to adjust going forward, ultimately protecting the organization? Another piece that we want to talk about is that lighting piece. And this is something that we've looked at, and you can see here, some of our bobtails or our liquid haulers, but is leveraging some of that visibility, putting light bars on the backs of our trucks. So ultimately, if you're going to be stopping or coming to a stop, it can have pulsation up at the top, not just relying on brake lights to let people know that you're going to stop. We've had a handful of serious incidents with rear-end collisions, and ultimately we've seen a significant improvement in the safety of that and reduction of those incidents by adding in those light bars up at the top of those trailers, allowing other drivers that are going to be trailing us to know when we're going to be stopping. So some of those are things that we've added in. We've also, you can see with our bobtails, if those are not familiar in the bobtail industry, that's the top right-hand picture. That's what we're delivering propane out to our residential customers. But putting in blind spot warnings, sensors, again, parking assist, those are all things that are ultimately helping our drivers become better behind the wheel and ultimately protecting them when they're going onto customer properties. We've had a situation in the past where we've actually found a small child underneath one of our vehicles before we put it into motion. And if that doesn't give you little shivers, it gives me shivers every time, and we keep talking about it. But this is the type of technology that can ultimately protect not only our drivers, but those customers, the children, the areas that we're driving into, the properties that we're going to. That's where we see a significant improvement with this technology. So those are three core areas as we look at what we can do to improve our fleet. And overall, I think we've seen significant improvement in preventing incidents, adoption with it, things like that. So those are just some of the things related as to transportation technology that we're leveraging within CHS.
Hello, my name is Jason Eardley, as Glenn mentioned earlier. I wanted to speak a little bit today about technology and hazard monitoring, a little bit about maintenance, just kind of touch on a few areas with hazard monitoring and expand it a little. If you were in attendance last year, I talked a bit about critical safety devices. And, with the focus on advancing in technology, I guess, a lot of these hazard monitoring systems, these have been in use for many years in most of our facilities. OSHA has required that being one method of complying with protecting inside bucket elevators, for 35 whatever years now. But there have been some advances, and some of the things that we've done that go beyond maybe just your hazard monitoring package, say, that just, goes into the starter and shuts it down. Some advances that we've been doing over the last few years, we've done a focus on our reliability-centered maintenance and predictive maintenance, trying to go beyond preventive, and, we have these aspirational goals to do that. But some of the things that we've done here in the last few years with hazard monitoring, we've had a big initiative over the last few years to upgrade, update those systems. And we've expanded beyond bucket elevators with them, as I'm sure a number have in here as well. But we have some pretty cool systems. One, we've also concurrently, I guess, we're also upgrading a lot of our facilities with automation control systems. We're updating ones that have had control systems historically in our processing division, but we're modernizing, I guess, as some of those get sold. You have to buy, a Windows DOS or a DOS computer off of eBay, to change upgrade your system, which is terrible. But there are some pretty cool things we've done in regarding this. I mean, so it's holistically with, I guess, sensors and control systems, hazard monitoring being integrated, as opposed to being just standalone, which in some facilities they are. You can do pretty interesting things with them, and obviously I know that there are exhibitors here from the main companies, and I would encourage you, obviously, should go talk to them and see what they have to offer. But we're doing some pretty interesting things on the maintenance side, where we're instituting computerized maintenance management system. I think maintenance is probably, a lot of folks struggle with that. I mean, we struggle with it too. We set up, hey, every quarter check it, every 6 months do the verification that the sensors will shut down the equipment. Every year, we have certain things that we're doing. It can be difficult to do that. If you're just using Excel or a notebook or a clipboard in the maintenance shop with check boxes to things to do this week, which we've done all that. If you can get your control system and have it interact with the hazard monitoring, we get things like we can determine how much it's being run. We can determine efficiencies, the capacity, what's being put through it, and we have I know a lot of these systems are, like I said, they can be even decades old. I mean, it's not new technology, but we have more belt conveyors, open belts than I wish we had, but we have quite a few of those. And there are some interesting hazard monitoring systems with 10-year battery life now with lithium ion that are more reliable. We have wireless, and they're if you lose power to the system, they can still communicate. You can still see what's going on. You don't have to send people into potentially harm's way to go check on them. We have systems that we're starting to institute, where somebody had mentioned iPads earlier in control systems. We're starting to have remote technology like that where you can monitor. We have hazard monitoring that the manager, superintendents can look at in their house and see what's going on with it. So, in addition, we're putting it on things like hammer mills and dust collectors. The bare minimum that OSHA would tell you is on bucket elevators, but they're beyond the safety aspect. They're also very good you can tell you the health of your equipment in many ways by those as well. So, yes, it's a last line of defense, but you can use it in creative ways, I guess, in proactive ways to monitor the health of your equipment and as I mentioned earlier, look for utilization, time up, things like that. So, in addition to the automation, we also have the maintenance part. I mentioned the CMMS. We do have that kind of standard. Here are the time periods where these systems, these sensors, and their interlock functioning needs to be checked. But we've also expanded our automation group as part of these upgrades of these control systems, and I think some of the future might just be as well that in some cases, if you get there are certain industry standards, the International Electrical Engineering Code or something. It's IEC 61511. But anyway, you know, if you institute the maintenance similarly as you do on your equipment to your HAZMON, in many cases, if you're following those types of standards, you might find that maybe you don't need to do maintenance as often as you need to, and you'd still have effective systems. You know, obviously the primary thing that we need to do there is those need to work. Their primary function is to protect people, protect the facilities. But, you know, you can, if you get the expertise in those types of systems, and oftentimes they can look and say, okay, this bucket elevator or this belt conveyor or this hammer mill runs X period of time, maybe you don't need to do that. And set up a defensible, effective maintenance program. I think that's where, you know, that's where we're trying to go, to make it more effective. So with that, I'll hand it over to Noland.
Awesome. I'll start by saying I've been in the industry for somewhere around 42 years. And so I recall probably 20 years ago in my career, I spent 35 years with Viterra, and I can remember the first day where we started to, well, no, not the first day, but the first day of installation. But we had persistently been always challenged with lifting techniques, especially when it came to the packaging end of that business. And so the decision was made at that particular time that we were going to install a robotic arm. And it was rather interesting, and I could still remember back 20 years ago watching this thing and being thoroughly amazed by it. Packed a perfect pallet every time. It was efficient, no workplace injuries, never took a coffee break. It was just amazing to watch. But yet, as we were installing it, there was just this sense of guilt about how could we dare replace the human factor and take away somebody's job. And yet here we are 20 years ago, and I never ever fathomed we would ever see challenges with not being able to fill a job with an employee. And so here we are 20 years ago, I'm sitting up here talking about how do we institute and what are we sort of looking at in instituting technology into the workplace. And so I thought it was important we probably talk about some of the things in Scoular that we're starting to explore and experiment with. And we've been very, very fortunate, I think, within the Scoular company that we have a very, very strong field engineering group. And so they are always looking for innovative ways to and processes and all kinds of equipment that they are very, very quick to explore. And so collaboratively between EH&S and our field engineering group, we've ventured into many things that we're kind of looking at and starting to explore, which I'll share with you. And if there's anything that, you know, hopefully you can take home with you and institute into your own workplaces is I think, quite important. You know, I think the biggest barricade you have to get over sometimes is that just doesn't work for us. We can't do that. But at the end of the day, I would ask that you probably challenge yourselves on that and being able to look at that and try to get past that hurdle because, you know, sometimes I think the human factor and the human nature is it just won't work for us. It's too expensive. It's too extensive. But that doesn't mean you have to do sort of full-blown types of implementation. You know, you can ease into it, do it part and parcel. And so when we think about some of the things that we've done here at Viterra, it can be things as small as, I think, well, I know Matt didn't talk about it, but I know Jeff talked about it this morning, and that was, you know, kind of local or locomotive remote controls. Putting that into our locomotives, into our car moving equipment, which at one particular time we dedicated an entire person in that machine. And that's all they did there is sat there and unoperated rail moving equipment. And so now we've brought that person or that body out of that equipment, and now they're sort of implemented into everyday work activity in loading that string of cars or loading trucks for that matter. But in this particular case, I mean, it's an extra body. And so, with a lot of the labor challenges, and like I said, you heard Jeff talk about that again this morning, we've really had to resort to those types of that type of thinking, obviously, to be able to overcome some of the labor challenges that we have had in a lot of our smaller communities, where it seems almost impossible to find people to fill those positions. And so, hence, where I think we have to think more innovatively about that. If anybody isn't familiar with a lot of those remote controls, they're pretty simplistic. You have to have a multiple unit plug on those units, and it simply hangs on a guardrail or wherever you decide to mount it on the front of that equipment. Person walks in there with a remote control that gives them full capability of being able to control that unit, with a lot of safety features also built into it. Everything has its drawbacks. I mean, there are some challenges that we've encountered with some of them, is because you don't physically have somebody sitting in that equipment, you can never really monitor its operation all the time when you're, or constantly while you're away from that thing. So, things that we've run into is can't tell if the wheels are spinning simply because you're at a distance. And so there are some small challenges, but I would say that there isn't really anything that can't be overcome. Other things that we're looking at, obviously, track configuration. So we're taking all that into account as we either retrofit a site or else we're building a greenfield site. A lot of those things are really, really built on the premise that we can really, really start to incorporate a lot of technology into it. Whereas, before that wasn't really even given a thought or a second thought. And so we're experimenting a lot of these types of rail moving equipment or remoteness really on circle tracks, ladder tracks, where it's conducive to do so. So that's one of the things that we're doing. Currently exploring a lot of technology in opening rail gates or rail car gates. A lot of our injuries come from wrenching on rail car gates that are stuck, jammed, those types of things. And so, we're starting to really explore and toy with a lot of that equipment that really assists in aiding people not having to grab bars, bend down, get into awkward positions, put themselves under cars, those types of things where equipment will do that for us quite easily. Moving on. Some other things, and I think, it should have a pipe dream, I guess, at the end of the day. And right now, I think another thing we're really looking at is kind of autonomous systems, or semi or quasi autonomous systems, where potentially we're working with a lot of suppliers right now, or talking with a couple of suppliers right now, and we're really seriously pursuing a completely autonomous or quasi-autonomous rail car loading system. And by that I mean, at the end of the day, cars are spotted, and this system would be fully capable of opening gates, opening lids, tearing seals off the top of lids with cars that are returned onto the sidings with seals still affixed. So cutting off those seals, opening lids, dropping down cameras down into each one of those compartments to verify that there is no potential contamination in each of those. And then it goes into loading sequence, and then it will obviously close lids and then seal lids and kick them out the door. And so we're looking at that capability of what that could do for us and how that would streamline efficiencies going forward as well. So those are a lot of things from a Scoular perspective that we're really starting to look at, and explore, and pursue.
I'd like to kind of piggyback off of your comment about the rail operations, and that is something that we've also started to look into. Maybe not really with our shuttle loaders, but you think about with our smaller spot cars and a lot of our fertilizer plants, we're starting to look into more of that remote technology. You talk about the integrated safety piece, there's human error in remembering a person sitting in a track mobile or in a locomotive signaling the horn before it goes into movement. but they really integrated the safety controls into these remotes where you have to have both hands on in a perfect sequence. It'll automatically sound the alarm before it puts it in motion. There's a lot of improvements. There's some challenges, but there's a lot of improvements that we've seen by utilizing this technology. And I think a lot of people have talked about it, reducing, or we don't have as much help or people in those areas where now we're able to do it with a person on the ground monitoring the track movement that's around there, who's around, what's happening, and be able to move that car safely. So it's a good piece of technology that we're starting to see more and more of it within our own organization, that I think we're starting to see it within the industry as more as well.
Yeah, and Matt brought up a good point. It's not about job elimination. It's about being in a position where we just can't find people. And so it really does force you to become very, very more innovative, I think, to that degree, understanding that that's a situation that's probably not going to change. If anything else, is probably going to get worse into the future. And so that's, it's just the reality of the times we're in.
All right, gentlemen, thanks. That was very good information. Obviously, I have a couple questions for you, and it's for each one. You can feel free to pass the question around too. Not one of you has to respond. You can all respond. So, just want to follow up with you, Jason, as far as the type of equipment that might be worth considering for hazard monitoring aside from bucket elevators.
Yeah, I touched on that a bit. I mentioned, I think, hammer mills, dust collectors, belt conveyors, drag conveyors. We've been upgrading hazard monitoring, those types of systems on pellet mills as well as in our animal feed and our corn processing facilities, where a lot of them have always had like the shear pin, but we've been installing in some cases some vibration sensors that tie into the hazard monitoring for those. We've done that for hammer mills. We're doing bearing temperature sensing on the hammer mills. Those have historically been a problem piece of equipment. So those you can use those either attachments, additions to, or standalone systems on those various pieces of equipment, and they offer value.
Nolan or Matt, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, and that's another thing I think as Scoular we've really started to, especially the industry now with dust hazard assessments. If anybody's had those done at their facilities, now you'll notice that's a huge focus. And so if you don't have HAZMON, be prepared for that, because obviously that is something that comes to light pretty quickly in a lot of those assessments. And so that is something from a Scoular perspective that we're really pursuing now, and we're ensuring that a lot of, especially on new installs, our field engineering group is all over that with all kinds of HAZMON equipment, but we're now going back and obviously retrofitting a lot of our older equipment as well to make sure it kind of meets that demand as well. So.
Since you mentioned dust, I know that'll be a topic in and of itself regarding the NFPA standards and dust hazard analysis. I'm sure we'll be covered a bit on that, but it's not exactly HAZMON, but something that has advanced in the last few years have been like the mechanical isolation systems, for example. They're making those now, to protect a piece of equipment from transferring an explosion up or downstream, that are mechanical, like flap valves, and they're making them larger now, whereas in many cases it used to be, even a few years ago, if we wanted to isolate, in some cases in ductwork, you had to use chemicals because of the size. And so it's not exactly HAZMON, but there are options that they're making now, recognizing that those are being put into a lot more places. I think now primarily a big part of that is being driven by those AHAs.
And Matt, so just wanted to follow up on your conversation as well. So what kind of pushback did you get from employees? I can't imagine you'd receive any pushback from employees on some of the technology that you were putting into some of your vehicles.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly as pushback. I think the comment you kind of always get is actually two words: Big Brother. That's kind of a private area, is being in the cab of a pickup or in a semi. And honestly, some of it is the feeling that people are getting is that we're always watching. So you've got somebody sitting back at your office that's just watching a monitor as this person's going down I-90 and just watching for them to make that one mistake. And that was the one that you're going to follow up. So part of it is just talking through this with our drivers of how the system works, why it's there, but also leveraging other drivers that have had that technology to be kind of talking about the improvements that's made, the support that's made, the security that it's made. So the biggest point on pushback is that kind of that hey, it's watching me in the vehicle. And once we talk through of how the actual system works, and for those that don't know, the system works is it's recording, but it doesn't actually record it as a snippet until there's an actionable event. So if all of a sudden I swerve, I slam on the brakes, that's when the actual recording and it saves, and that's what would actually get transmitted to a supervisor or to an EH&S contact. So I think there's some of that idea of how the system performs and what's actually being recorded, what's being shared, and what's being followed up on. But the most important thing I can say is, is just sitting down and having that one-on-one or having that conversation with the group to understand what the whole purpose of the camera technology in the unit's for. I've heard others talk about it, and even in the side conversations of, hey, we just put it, forward-facing, which is good. I mean, ultimately, that's protecting the unit itself. If there is an event, there's a question about who did what, where, and when. That's great. Taking that step further, and that's a harder conversation, is when that camera is pointed at the driver, looking for the behaviors. But ultimately, what we talk about it is it's not only there for protection of you, but it's protecting the people that are on the road with you, the areas that we're driving through, the communities in which we live and work in. Those are the reasons why we need to make sure that we're consistently applying our expectations and driving with the right behaviors.
Yeah, we, with the Scoular fleet, we have 84 commercial vehicles out on the road, and same idea, we installed cameras into each and every one of our commercial vehicles, and to Matt's point, there was a lot of pushback about the rear-facing aspect of it, so that was kind of a bit of a negotiation tool, and it's a culture change. So at the end of the day, we've left the front-facing on, turned off the rear-facing, but I would say on probably 3 or 4 occasions now, having that camera available in the event of an incident or an accident has paid huge dividends for us, especially with law enforcement, where we've been able to provide a tape and then a video of that accident occurring when the other driver who's completely responsible won't claim responsibility. That system has already paid for itself in many of those cases. So it is a bit of a culture shock, but I'm sure we'll get to the rear-facing sooner than later. But
yeah, we've been using that technology for quite a while too. I don't recall if there was big pushback when it was put in. We've been using it for probably 15 years. I'll bet there was pushback. I wasn't involved in trucking at that time, and I don't remember now if we've switched out our system to a different company, and I don't recall if we've instituted the driver-facing one. But it also has it can detect if they're doing if there's signs of drowsiness, and it helps with your DOT score. If you every time you have if you get moving violations and other things, the DOT will basically maintains a score of you. And if you get high enough, you're at a higher likelihood of them coming in and doing full-blown audits on your logs, your maintenance records on your vehicles, and all that. And I know it's not fun. We've had some of our trucking locations go through it. They don't look forward to those if they have to go through it.
And I'll say one thing on the pushback. Well, we had some pushback for certain groups. We're looking to actually switch different vendors, and those are the first ones of drivers saying, "Don't take my camera." Because of how many times that, to your point, Noland, is we've had to use that with law enforcement to be able to show what our drivers did right and protect the organization, and it's a good security blanket.
it is.
And that AI technology is something else. To your point, is they actually create those driver scorecards based on behaviors, and so you're able to actually actively monitor and manage the drivers of what training maybe certain people need, or maybe a sit-down conversation with X amount of drivers based on their overall score and how they're driving behind the wheel.
And this is open to questions too, so if anyone from the audience has any questions, comments, please feel free. Oh.
Matt, again, thank you for sharing about the DOT transportation side, and I'm familiar with the looking ahead in the rear. I think one lesson learned for me, listening to the drivers, the experts that drive every day, yes, the camera's always intimidating, but one thing I tried to express to our team, it's about like the rumble strip. I want that camera to recognize when my eyes are closing, I'm getting fatigued, or my lane change. It's that rumble strips where it alarms me, saying, hey, I'm not in control of this vehicle, so we can stop, get rest. I think that's the key message for these systems, is letting those colleagues know that they're fatigued or they need to stop. So I think that's a big part versus just recording.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I think part of it too is you don't know, sometimes you don't realize the behaviors that you're displaying behind the wheel. And so that's where some of this technology people, all of a sudden, hey, yeah, shoot, I didn't realize you grabbed your phone. Or shoot, yeah, I guess I wasn't, you start to doze off, or some of those helps protect that driver and keep them kind of those guardrails. The big part with this AI technology, and that's why I love seeing where technology going within the cab. Like I said before, up to this point, it's always been just recording, and then it's up to the supervisor to go have that follow-up conversation. This, you can change the behavior actively, consistently, as it's happening. And then those rare circumstances where the driver continues to violate or continues to ignore it, then that's the opportunity to sit down and have that maybe change of course and heart to heart.
Have you guys considered using, we just changed our telematics here this last fall to dual facing cameras on our truck fleet. And our telematics, we can rate a safety score. We let it, it's already got a lot of the unattended driving, no seatbelt, all the DOT requirements that's required by law. Have you guys utilized like a score or base off driver behavior and whether good or bad in your system? How do you manage that with the drivers?
Not yet. It's a slow progression. First steps are going to make sure that we have in all of the cabs, but then to your point, eventually we're going to be able to pull all that into a driver scorecard and to be able to evaluate and say, okay, which ones are not, and ultimately decide where we want to go. It's like I said, if it's increased training or even saying, hey, maybe it's not a good fit in our organization. But the driver scorecard, absolutely, part of it is just building towards it. The last thing I would also say is before we start slapping, cameras in units, make sure you have a plan of how it's going to be handled. I think that's one of the common issue I've seen with our organizations, and I'll be honest with ours, is we liked putting cameras in. It was great feedback instantly. You could see what's happening, but there was no consistency of responsibilities, what the manager's responsibilities, what the EHS responsibilities were, what the driver's responsibilities were, how that data was going to be managed. Have a policy or have some kind of guidance of how that camera technology is going to be used within your organization before you just go and start putting up cameras in the cab.
I could answer to that question. When we put this in our fleet, to counteract the opposition, we also put in a quarterly bonus to the driver. So I forget if it's $1,000 or $1,500 a quarter. And it's solely based on the safety score. And you can lose that bonus by, if you run a red light, if there's certain key factors that you would lose the bonus on. And but by rewarding that positive behavior from that safety score on that camera, it took away almost all of that opposition. And again, if you grab your cell phone while you're driving, you automatically lose your bonus. We do not have the problem with drivers using their cell phone. So anyways, it was a great way. And then from a raise standpoint, the goal was to increase that bonus based proactively on the safety score rather than maybe the hourly rate or the per mile rate. Keep making that bonus a bigger piece based off the safety.
Well, we did see this, we implemented this within our energy side, and I know this is probably what a lot of people are thinking of, they're going to quit. I think a lot of people, originally, there's some people, I shouldn't say all of them, there's some people that says, you know what, you put this into my cab, I'm quitting. Often what we saw with that implementation is that's a hollow threat. We didn't actually have hardly any turnover when we implemented the cameras within our energy side. And honestly, where we put it even into our ag side, we haven't seen necessarily the saying, hey, I'm going to leave the organization because of it. Ultimately, I also say it's because it's becoming so common in the industry. No matter where you're going to go drive, you can almost expect to see cameras in those vehicles.
Were you able to get any savings from insurance after implementing the systems?
Our insurance loved it. I mean, it's one of those points that we cover within our insurance renewals, and we talk about it. And I think to that point of what you're starting to see it in the different fleets, it's going to be almost one of those as an expectation. It's now readily available. I would say savings or not, but it definitely helped our cause.
This question is for Matt, but anybody can answer it too if you have it. Have you migrated any of this technology into forklifts, other mobile equipment, or anything like that?
No, we haven't, not yet.
You've talked about it.
We've talked about it, but ultimately we want to be able to get it off the ground and make sure it's consistently applied within all of our CMB units. I'll also say this, for those that are in the co-op side of it, limit to where you're going to use it. It's probably not maybe the best for inside of a interrogator or a sprayer or some of those situations. So kind of drawing a line of how it's going to be used, where it's going to be used, because ultimately we've had it in the past where that camera was being set off all the time because you're going through a bumpy field.
We haven't used that exact technology in other vehicles, but we have used some other items here and there. I don't know that we've fully, committed to instituting them, but like, for example, there's a mining company that built a proximity sensing system for the edge. I forget what the machine is called, where it's cutting into the face of in the mine, and they were having miners getting crushed to death by these. And you can wear a device, and the system then can sense it and shut it. It's like hazmat on a vehicle in a way. And we have put those on a couple barge facilities where we're using, like the duty cycle cranes, or the shovels. I don't know. We haven't really expanded that, but I mean, we've tried that a little bit. It's had mixed success. On forklifts, we use the light systems that we'll put the bright lights around it, but I don't believe we have any sensing technology or driver monitoring on those to speak of.
Yeah, no, we haven't toyed with that either. It's just, we probably don't have enough of them in the system. So.
Okay, great. So this is back to you, Noland. So as far as the technological advances that Scoular's been pursuing, how is that, how has that impacted labor utilization, labor expenses, while also reducing the level of risk?
Yeah, so that's another good reason, really, just for some of the reasons we're sort of pursuing it is cost efficiency. I mean, if you already have a labor shortage, then obviously, if we're looking and pursuing autonomous or quasi-autonomous systems, I mean, that plays into a larger picture as well as far as cost efficiencies and those things. I know there's an initial investment, but at the same token, you always have to work in the payoffs and paybacks, and so that's one of the reasons we're kind of pursuing that, and we haven't quite got into the system yet, so you can't really explain or be able to share, whether it's a worthwhile exercise or not. But obviously, it's a trend we're starting to really lean towards, simply because I think the alternatives are pretty lean. So. But having said that, I mean, we're also looking at even old technology where we know an autonomous system, for instance, we've spent quite a bit over the last year with just, a lot of our Mexico shipments require employees to be up there sealing cars and then having to blow off cars to ensure that there is no contamination left on the tops of those cars. And so we recognize that as a pretty serious hazard where we were having, from a timely perspective, with a lot of the fall protection systems that we had in, just weren't large enough, they weren't long enough. So it meant that probably we were able to load a car, seal it, but then we'd have to kick it out and probably have somebody climb that car again without fall protection to be able to blow it off and meet end user expectations. And so we've spent a lot here in the last year expanding a lot of our existing fall protection systems just to be able to accommodate that, so employees remain under fall protection at all times when they're on the tops of rail cars. So.
Jason, Matt, anything else to add to that from the CHS ADM perspective?
When you're talking about autonomous, I guess it goes to, and I didn't cover it in my presentation, it didn't necessarily fit with the fleet side, but for those, we also are operating in the fertilizer industry, and we unload barges on the rivers. One of the piece of technology, I don't know, maybe others have started to use this or not, but it's a completely remote bobcat that we are now lowering into the actual barges themselves. We actually have a command system within the facility that a person sits. It's almost like a computer game where they sit down and they've got monitors all in front of them. But what it does is it reduces the risk of an employee having to be lowered down into an actual hull itself and to be able to sit in that skid steer and have to unload it. We can now work through and literally sit in an office, sitting at a computer station with joysticks, be able to lower down that bobcat right into there, keeping the person out of that risk base, and be able to clean out the barge itself from that perspective. So, you know, part of it is when you look at technology, it's just how far do you want to dig, and what identifying, to your point of identifying your critical risks and coming up with controls. Those were the conversations that we've had. You know, this is the one that makes us uncomfortable. So what type of technology is out there? And you can partner with a lot of these organizations, Bobcat, you name it, be able to say is, what can we do here? And so part of this is sharing this. I think this is a great event because there are so many great ideas that other companies are exploring, and just start asking the questions and seeing what's possible.
The barge got me thinking. We at some of our locations, we're starting to institute these. They're basically, I think they're sonar, and you put them at the corner of each barge, and you can get your draft readings without having to go out onto the barge anymore. And so that's obviously as little water exposure as you can get our folks, the better, obviously. But that also does help with, you know, it's labor that doesn't have to be done. They can see it. The superintendent at our one location can just take his phone, and he can see how full the barge is right now from when he's on vacation. He can see what the drafts are. And there's some, we've looked into a bit of like automation with tablets to be able to control it. You know, with the ultimate objective is to get as few people out on the water as you can. So it's a safety, you reduce risk as well as, yeah, I mean, it adds to efficiency of loading of those, that type of equipment.
Jason, so as far as the technology goes for the hazard monitoring, what's the type of technology that's out there to determine if the hazard monitoring equipment's having a problem? You know, if there's any type of issue with the equipment, what's the technology that's out there that you're using right now?
Again, I don't think it's extraordinarily new technology necessarily, but we have gotten better. It used to be that, and a lot of locations we still are, but it used to be you use your freeze spray to test that the sensor is actually changing temperatures. You know, there are testing devices now. We have testing devices that you can, some are made by the manufacturer. We also have, our instrumentation team has some as well that you can simulate or actually test, you know, a temperature sensor and ensure that the alarm system functions, ensure that the interlock functions. They also, in some locations, we're now going in and they're checking the health of the logic solver, you know, the electronics and that part of the system. I think that's gotten better and more sophisticated over the years. That's what we're trying to get to. You know, we're not fully doing that level everywhere, but that's where we're trying and we're progressing toward.
Matt, Nolan, anything else to add to that? No. Matt, so obviously when we're talking about the pushback, right, but what other considerations do you think companies should have when looking into the camera technology?
I think part of it goes back to what we've covered so far is how do you intend to use it? There's so many different vendors out there, and I'll just be honest, I'll give you a few. Like, we use Razor Technology is one of them. We use PeopleNet. We use Lytix. Those are the different types of technologies out there, but I think ultimately deciding one is how it's going to be used, where it's going to be applied, And again, even to the driver scorecards, what are the capabilities of those systems that can ultimately ensure that you have a safe fleet that's going down the roadway. So having a clear plan, again, going back to it, have that clear, I would also say guidance or policy of how that camera technology is going to be used, and then making sure that you're partnering with key drivers, key stakeholders, operations leaders, you name it, to make sure that you're doing it together. Because the last thing you want is, EH&S or safety is going to be pushing something more down my throat, or they're just trying to get me fired. No, the whole intention is to make sure that, again, for us in small communities, we want to make sure we have safe fleets going down the road.
Yeah. Oh. Go ahead. Well, and it's a good point, Matt, because I know we're on our third platform since we've pursued analytics within the cabs of trucks, and I think one thing, and we continue to learn from each one of those platforms, but I think the biggest thing we overlooked when we first got into it was making it user-friendly for the driver. We recognized a lot of our pushback was coming from the sophistication and a certain demographic, obviously, being older drivers and behind the wheel that just, we overlooked that whole thing. And so our third platform we're on now is very, very easy to use. It's systematic in the sense where it makes sense in the process for when they're using it, and it's really helped, I think, a lot with that whole pushback and reluctance to really have to utilize it.
This question's for any of you. Are any of you using your cameras as part of your pre-trip inspections?
Not the cameras, the technology platforms we are. And that's what I would also say with any one of these technology platforms, when you're doing your due diligence of which ones you want to go with, fully bake of what are the full capabilities, what can Razor provide me? Because again, to that point, you talk about tablet technology, you talk about those pre and post, and get away from the paper. Some have great maintenance programs, some have great, like the inspection program. So we're not using the camera for that, but we're using the platforms that come along with it. So it's a one-stop shop. Instead of people having to jump over from this platform to that platform to do multiple things with their units, you can go right there and take care of everything.
So I think the big question for all three of you, for everything you've been talking about, is cost, right? And how does that factor in? So, when there's discussions internally about all this technology, obviously the capital that's going to be involved, the investment, the time frame, how does that all factor in? How is that all carried out? Like when you started having these discussions and as far as the implementation, how did that work, as far as the transportation, hazard monitoring, and rail? How does that all work? Because they're all very different, but all very similar in a lot of ways.
I would say from our standpoint, expanding, obviously, the bucket elevators, as I mentioned earlier, have been required to have, there's a few different options, but predominantly people are using hazard monitoring on bucket elevators to comply with OSHA. The expansion of further sensors, like we added requirements now for plug or flow detection, for example. We tie that into the system as well. I would say that it was lukewarm receptions when they were brought up, but just over the last few years, we've had some change of personnel. We've had a few bad things occur over in the industry as well as and I think it's just kind of been a slow burn and just come to acceptance that, we feel we need to expand our protection to the other pieces of equipment and additional augmentation of the existing ones, and it just kind of, but it was certainly not, hey, I'd like to upgrade all of our hazard monitoring. It was a big pitch. It was a 5-year program, ongoing. Did not go like, here's an open checkbook,
Yeah, I would say we started small, build in a sample size. We also then can fully understand what the cost perspective is going to be, because sometimes that can also change. But we want to make sure, to your Jason's point, we had situations where then all of a sudden became dang it, I wish we would have had that technology in place. And that kind of, I would say, spread it a little bit quicker to be able to get that into our units and move it along. But we didn't just all of a sudden flip a switch and say every single unit's going to have a camera. We started slow. We started with our higher risk units, our hazmat vehicles, our bobtails, our energy fleet, working then into our higher risk fleets, and just started to chip away at it to ultimately get us where we're at today. But part of it is building your case and not just saying, hey, I think this is a good idea, I hear this is a good idea, this is what we can get out of it. And also leveraging us, each other, to say what points did you use to sell your management teams on why we need this technology.
How much extra is that extra? I mean, we're required nowadays to have electronic logs anyway. You know, so you're going to have some sort of a system if you're doing trucking. I don't know the answer. I don't know how much more it costs to just have a baseline electronic log system versus putting in some of these other additional monitoring.
Unless you got the ag exemption, which is also a little bit different from electronic monitoring or the log. But to that point, I think it's just becoming part of the cost of doing business. And I think that's ultimately how we're viewing this is it's the cost of doing business. If we're going to drive our fleet, we're going to drive these units, we have to bake that cost right into it, knowing that it's not going away. To your point, you go, a lot of these larger fleets these days, if drivers want to leave, they're going to end up finding this technology, and it's continuing to make it, they're making it more cost effective every single day. There's certain ones, talking about costs, is some of them go on monthly, there's no contracts, there's just a lot of flexibility. You just find the right vendor that works for you.
Yeah, and I know that was a challenge with the Scoular company as well. And at one particular time, I think we've all been in this boat where, obviously from a senior leadership level, it was asset expansion, market growth. We've been very fortunate to have a CEO come in. Now Paul Mace is CEO of the Scoular company, and he came in with a philosophy of what he's seen in the past, and safety and innovation is a big part of his strategies. And so we've really started to see that really change, where, to Matt's point, it's, the philosophies now is it's the cost of doing business. So it's something we have to take into account every time we're looking at a retrofit, every time we're looking at an expansion, a purchase, or a greenfield site. We know that that's going to be built in and accounted for. So.
Well, great, and I think we got one final question here.
I was just going to make a comment in support of Noland and Matt's statement about it's a cost of doing business. And I think for any of us that have 500 plus employees, it's more of a statement as we can't afford to not have this technology in our vehicle, especially with all the logoed vehicles that we have in our communities. We are driving hazardous billboards that anybody's willing to try to pin something on us. So when we start talking about expense, we have to talk about the safety and welfare of our organization, our stakeholders, all of the above. So I think anybody that starts thinking about the cost, that's a delineating factor as well, as we can't afford not to.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Great. Well, I know also with the new technology, I can pull my phone out here and I can check on the Verizon Smart Family app how my daughter's doing driving, right? Because it has on here, I can see how fast she's driving, how many stops she's made, if she's been on her phone, all of that, right? So I guess I can, check with her and tell her that I've been talking about transportation.
How did you justify the cost of that?
Yeah.
How would I justify the
Did
cost?
Did you have to ask the boss for money?
I tell you, it's amazing what the technology is that you have right there.
Yeah.
I mean, how you can have it. I mean, we're talking at the corporate level, but at the personal level too. I mean, all the information that's out there and how you can use that. Yeah,
That's right.
exactly.
Jess, I'm really hoping it was her mother that taught her to drive.
Yeah, I know. Our dad has a lead foot, but we don't have to talk about that. But anyway, I want to thank Nolan and Jason and Matt. Thank you very much. Great information, and appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.